The Matt Rhule era begins today at Nebraska.
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey gang, Derrick Pearson VP here from 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln, Nebraska, home of the Fighting Huskers of Nebraska. We want to thank you for making Locked On Huskers, Locked On Go Big Red, your first stop, watch, listen each and every single day. We appreciate you. Live from the folks from Locked On Sports. We thank them for what they do, and the folks from BetOnline for allowing us to provide this content for you each and every single day. BetOnline, where the game begins. And before we get into some Matt Rhule talk, the folks on BetOnline have set up this week. It is championship week. Games of note and interest, of course, with Purdue and Michigan. I'm not sure it's the most intriguing of games, but BetOnline currently has Michigan a 16-point favorite in the Big Ten championship game. The over-under is 50.5 points. So do with that what you will. There's some other interesting props on there, but we'll get to those later in this show. I want to address a couple of things in this space as we head forward in this podcast, in this episode. This is about questions, what we know and what we think we know about Matt Rhule, and then the presser today. The next episode, in the next episodes, we'll talk about the things that Matt Rhule and Trev Alberts disclose and share in the press conference, and we'll get to that. But I want to start with where we are currently in this thing and where Matt Rhule has to take it. Being the new director and the new leader, there are some things that we have to set going forward. So first of all, where this program is currently, and after a victory over a rival in Iowa, on the road in Iowa, interim coach Mickey Joseph held this thing together and pieced it to the point where they could get a win in Iowa. Then what happens now, and the change and the assignment that Matt Rhule is accepting, has to be detailed and broken down. Who stays and who goes. And that's important, not only from the coaching staff perspective, but from the player and the roster perspective. And then almost as importantly, and lost in a lot of the conversation, are the recruits and then the recruiters, the people in the administration who handle vital and important tasks each and every single day when it comes to student athletes, when it comes to the business that's being done. Those things have to be re-recruited, redefined, re-evaluated, and then put in space. Now, I'm not sure there are any givens. There are zero assumptions allowed in this space until Matt Rhule and Trev Alberts speak on it. And we'll get that information. But when you talk about what's required for Nebraska and Matt Rhule, the things that he has to fix, there are things that he has to fix, and there are things that he has to improve. Some of those the things that require fixing often require imploding. You have to break it all down to nothingness and then build it back up so where it's a strength instead of a weakness. Some of the things that we have in play are these. The fan base has an affection for Mickey Joseph. So the question number one in all of the interaction that I'm getting on social media, personal and otherwise, is the concern that Mickey Joseph will not be a part of this program going forward. We may get more answers on that pretty quickly, on whether Mickey wants to stay. I will not speak for Mickey Joseph. I will not speak for Matt Rhule. I'm only speaking for myself. My curiosity is that the goodwill and good energy put into the space to hold not only the team together and the program together, but to hold the fan base together. It would almost be a double negative to not only lose Mickey, but to lose the energy that he had injected into the space. So that is a thing that is of concern. The same can be said for Bill Busch, who almost out of nowhere injected himself into a space, compliments of Mickey Joseph choosing him to lead the defense and to lead this group of young men through a major part of the season. That's the gauntlet. Like this coaching staff, Mickey Joseph and Bill Busch led them through the gauntlet. That Wisconsin-Iowa gauntlet that happens at the end of the season. That's who they had to face. Michigan, Minnesota, those are the 4 games on the schedule. You can get lost on the others, but the reality is they had to go through the gauntlet and get this team, and in its broken pieces, broken parts, its injured pieces, injured parts, and to get them through goodwill and energy alone through the season's end to a victory over Iowa. So for Matt Rhule, he has to look at, one, the state of the union, and that's part of what we're discussing here, and then to get our eyes towards the players, because as much energy, information, resource, money is thrown to the grown-ups and the adults in the room, the coaches, a large portion of this thing will play out based on the young people, on the people on the roster who do the work and make the sacrifice. So Matt Rhule will respond to that. Again, we have a pretty good understanding that he will talk about the brand that he wants Nebraska to be. In order to do that today, we have to talk about the brand that is, and that's why we're breaking all of this down. The brand that is a broken brand that is not shining at the level that it should be, at the elevation that it should be, and a change is required. That's where we are. That's the location, and how we got here was a mixture of mistakes and bad decisions and wrong choices. And now you have a chance, this program has a chance to regain its footing, to regain its grown-up legs, and to move forward. Matt Rhule has been given the keys to the car, the keys to the house. He has all the passwords, and then he will be able to redirect this thing. We'll pause here so that we can then begin to look at, we've talked about coaches, we have to talk about players, and then we will also talk about the fan base and where we'll take the temperature of the room for the fan base. I can tell you what I've heard, the conversations that have been forwarded to me, and the things that are of concern to the fans who have reached out to me when it comes to Nebraska football. We'll throw the break. More Locked On Huskers when we come back. Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and welcome back to Locked On Huskers. Derrick Pearson, 93.7 The Ticket, Lincoln, Nebraska. Again, thanking the folks from BetOnline for allowing us to do what we do and bring you this content each and every day. BetOnline, where the game begins. Championship week, the Pac-12 conference. USC, a 1-point favorite over Utah, which interesting enough because they've already met. So those things are in play. Again, eyes to championship week. We will later discuss Clemson and North Carolina, Georgia, and LSU along the way. In talking about Matt Rhule and the state of the union, that this week for this program, for Matt Rhule, will be about disclosure of plan. He will talk about the brand and what he wants Nebraska to be under his watch. Now, this is a slippery slope because when you're an outsider and you come in and you're going to try to speak to rebranding Nebraska football, I am curious and leaning in to what Matt Rhule says about what he wants the brand to be, because that'll tell you where the fans will get behind it. right? I mean, you've got several factions here in Nebraska when it comes to football, and they're the run the damn ball folks. They're the folks that want you to be able to compete with Ohio State and Michigan. That requires big uns up front and your ability to focus. Where do you get said linemen that will match up with Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State? Those are things, but then the plan that Matt Rhule will disclose and share is important because it will identify the brand, the what, and the who. Then you'll get into what direction are you going to go and how are you going to get there. At some point, he will disclose the mission, the end game, the GPS that will tell all of us whether his brand and plan are working. And it's important to put them together. And Matt Rhule has lived by putting those things in order. So identifying where you are that 4-8 isn't good enough in a program that still perceives itself as blue blood and has the arrogance and confidence to say we demand better than what we've been getting. And those are good things, but Matt Rhule has to acknowledge that. He has to, how he speaks about the legacy that is, and then the direction that is important. How will you get there? What's next, and how will you get there? Right? To come in and say that, we have to be stronger and more physical up front. How will you make that happen? And that is important because, again, the thing about Nebraska, the preaching of the 500-mile radius and being able to pull and dominate recruiting in that space. Well, there's an assumption that Nebraska is top of the line in that space. And that's not necessarily true. It's certainly not true to a new coach who has to come in and sell his brand, identify his brand, sell his brand as the brand. And that's going to be important because you got to tell people, listen, we're going to run the ball. We're going to use a fullback. We're going to use 3 receivers. We're going to use multiple tight ends. What are you going to do? He's going to have to tell what the brand is. Then he's going to sell it. And then he's got to tell how you're going to get there. And the rules of that are important because you to say, well, we're going to go and get 8 315-pound linemen. Well, where are you going to get them? And how do you disclose that those 8 new linemen are going to be Big Ten elite level? Because if you say that they're just going to be competent, folks aren't going to be happy. They have to be elite. And then he has to say what his target is. Is his target 500 football next year? Is it to win 4 games? Because his first years in places after an implode aren't necessarily 500 football. That's not how it works. And again, we have the facts that show that. So what are you selling? What's the plan? Is next year a winning season? Or are we projecting ahead? It's an 8-year deal. So are we really just going to wait and say, okay, we're going to measure this thing at the end of 8 years and we'll see how we go. In 8 years, we'll beat Ohio State. Like we'll be as good as Ohio State or Michigan. That's a thing that has to be said. He has to tell the plan. He won't be able to hide from it. He won't. And knowing most coaches, going to say, look, I have no fear of Ohio State and Michigan. You can't if you're going to walk into Nebraska and take, $9 million a year. You better not be afraid of anybody at this point because you're receiving money to beat them. $9 million a year is not for you to beat Georgia Southern and Meatball State. $9 million a year is for you to make the rest of the Big Ten Conference fearful of you and to make Nebraska fans proud of you. There is going to be friction. There's going to be resistance. How he handles it, and that Northwestern Pennsylvania Penn State bravado that is in the blood of Matt Rhule will come into play, and how people receive it and perceive it is going to be important. Right? He will look. He's a Penn State guy through and through, so some of that will be pushed. Is Penn State a target on the field and off? Does he want to make this Penn State West? And he better be careful about the answer to that because that's important. Again, as the brand is identified, it then will share the plan and the mission and the end game. So as we get the information, gather it. These are questions that are going to be asked this week at infinitum. From all corners of Nebraska, he's going to get questions about who are you? Who are you trying to be? Who are we? Who are we trying to be? And then how we're going to get there. And if the answers aren't in line and the answers don't light the fire, it'll be problematic, right? We know that there will be more questions than answers. It's not possible for Matt Rhule to come in this week and give all the answers to all the questions that apply to and identify this football program as it stands. There's zero chance that Matt Rhule can answer every question. Some of the answers will fall on Trev Alberts' lap. Some of those questions and answers, who the heroes and villains are, what are the things that Trev wants to accomplish, who were the people involved, who were the people that were considered. This week will be about questions and answers because there's always a plot twist. Matt Rhule may not be the plot twist. His staff that he hires may be. We'll throw it to break. When we come back, there's more. We'll answer some of those questions. Some of the things that Trev's going to have to answer, some of those things that Matt Rhule is going to have to answer, and most importantly, some of the things that the fans demand be answered. We'll get those to those next on Locked On Huskers. Welcome back through this trip through kind of the state of affairs as Matt Rhule being announced officially as Nebraska's leader and director and conductor for Husker football. Again, we thank the folks from BetOnline. Clemson 7.5-point favorite over North Carolina in the ACC championship game. TCU a 2.5-point favorite over Kansas State in their championship game. And then Georgia, a 16.5-point favorite over LSU in the SEC championship game. All of that setting up college football playoffs. And this week we'll answer more questions about some of the bowl lineups, and we'll get all that information. We'll follow it on BetOnline as they give us the props and numbers for all of those. In this space, the leadership of the athletic department had to make decisions. Again, the state of the program, what the location was currently, were they satisfied with it? Who were the villains? What things had to be corrected? What things had to be changed? How you were going to change them? And this week, Trev Alberts should answer the question about who was considered, who was not considered, and why. Like, why Matt Rhule? And there are some easy quotables about why you would hire Matt Rhule. But then behind that, you get to the nuts and bolts and why you think it will work in Nebraska. Why do you think Matt Rhule's Penn State philosophy of life will work in Lincoln, Nebraska? Why do you think that Matt Rhule can recruit to Nebraska better than the people who were recruiting at Nebraska? What type of players does Matt Rhule want to coach? Because that's important, and I'm going to lay this thing out. An interesting plot twist in this thing is going to be when they ask Matt Rhule his thoughts on the Nebraska walk-on program. Because let me tell you, if you are put in charge for $9 million a year and for 8 years, how much of your time, energy, and resources will go to people that aren't going to help you beat Michigan or Ohio State on Saturday is a thing that elite coaches have in mind immediately. That of the 155 some odd players who are a part of the program, there are 75 of them who never see the field. But they use up the resources that are required, time and energy, that you could spend on the people who actually play the games. And yes, they're part of the scout team and a part of that, but how much of that, and not all coaches agree on how much of a priority and focus that should be. Nebraska fans know that. They've dealt with it in the past. Who was considered for the head coaching job? Like, was there a top 5 list? Were there favorites? And then who wasn't considered? Because that's going to be a big part of how people perceive and accept the new brand, the new plan, and the new mission of Nebraska football under its new leader, Matt Rhule. I'm just saying, this week there will be more questions than we can list. It would take us an entire podcast just to deal with all the questions. And it would take us another episode to give the answers. We'll try to do that for you this week here on Locked On Huskers. And the 3 words that Matt Rhule better put into his blood: get it right. Go Big Red.